How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. Today's build was inspired by the 6th episode of the 2nd season of The Mandalorian. Boba Fett has been my favorite character in the Star Wars universe for as long as I can remember. So seeing him again on the live screen, kicking butt, it made me feel like a kid again. I had this model kit sitting on my shelf for a long time. I didn't want to do anything with it till he showed up in the 2nd season. I was pretty sure he would, but I didn't know what he was going to look like. So I made some modifications with the Dremel and patched them up with some Milliput. It's always wise to wash your hands after using Milliput. Apparently it can cause some skin irritation. I also customized his pistol. In the episode, he shows up with a brand new pistol that we've never seen before. So I looked at a picture and tried to use some bits from other things I had lying around to recreate it. I painted all of the metal pieces with a silver spray paint, and I began working on his clothing. I also made him a 3D printed belt that works with the holster that comes with the model. In order to create the chipping of the paint on the armor, I used a chipping medium from Vallejo, and I put that on the armor as I saw it in the reference photos. I then painted his torso in a khaki color and all of his limbs in a mix of black 3.0 and Citadel Corvus black. I then airbrushed all of the pieces of armor with their base color. Next up was the chipping process. I reapplied some water to the areas that I wanted to chip, and then used a firm paintbrush to scratch away the paint, revealing the silver underneath. This is my first time ever doing this, and I was really happy with how it turned out. I found that if you use the side of the paintbrush along the edges of the metal, it creates a very convincing look. Once that was all painted, it was time to start putting them back together. I also added some extra details of color on his jetpack and began adding the fabric. I then applied some water decals that came with the kit, and I scratched away at those with some tweezers to make them fit in a little better. I dusted on some clay pigment in places to make them look a little more weathered, and then I painted his belt and his holster. I added some final touches and he was good to go. I couldn't find a stormtrooper for sale near my house, so I found one in my house. I borrowed it from a previous project. The nice thing about that is that it has a foot mount on the base that I can swap out any stormtrooper whenever I want. So I'll just replace this guy. Sorry, bud. I then began drilling a series of holes down through the pieces of armor so that wiring could get from his chest down to his foot and into the base. For the display, I used an 8-inch by 12-inch glass dome, and I used some XPS foam for the base that I cut into little discs and stacked on top of each other. After those layers were glued together, I used the hot wire cutter to give them a consistent edge. I realize a hot wire table would have been far better for this. I'm working on getting one of those, but for now I'll make do with this. I then carved away a little rock for Boba Fett to stand on, glued that to the top, and I sanded down all the edges to make them nice and smooth. I drilled a hole where the wiring will pass through the base. Then I mixed up my plaster with water and Mod Podge. The Mod Podge helps give it a little bit more flexibility. I plugged up the hole to make sure it didn't get filled in, and I applied the plaster to the top with a Pallette Knife. Before the plaster was dry, I randomly scattered some pebbles around. And then I filled in all the rest of the gaps with the plaster. I used my finger to give the surface a little bit more of an inconsistent texture, and then I used a Mod Podge and paint mixture to seal the base. After that was dry, I used some isopropyl alcohol to get the surface ready for my glue and water mixture. And then I covered everything but the rock in some nice fine sand. And the rock I gave a black wash. I created some little bushes by cutting up some scenic long grass and gluing it into little clusters. I let that dry for a minute and I moved back to the base. Applied some scenic glue again and some flocking. Applied some dark blended earth tones as well as some light blended earth tones. Sealed those in place, and then I glued some thicker dark foliage right along the edge of the rock. While the glue was still wet, I wanted to make some footprints, so I used the stormtrooper's feet to do that. And I moved on to the long grass. I used a dark green at the bottom, and I progressively made it lighter as it went towards the top. Then I glued it in place. After I knew exactly how Boba Fett was going to be standing, I used the milliput to create the boots, and I painted those black off camera. I then pulled the wire up through the leg of the stormtrooper and into his chest, where I soldered it to the LED filament. This was a little challenging because one of the solder joints was inside of the chest of the stormtrooper, so I had to have that done before threading everything through. It was a tight fit, but I got it working. I tested my circuit to make sure everything was working, and it was, so I got everything ready for final assembly. I painted the outside of the base with black 3.0. I wrapped the LED in red cellophane, drilled some anchor holes in the base for the characters, put them in place, and called it good. that is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a great week. I will see you next time.